So good evening, everybody, and welcome to our first Stronger Families series of this academic year. We're delighted to be hosting Louise Penfold from SAMH, and this is Suicide Prevention Week, Suicide Awareness Week, and we're delighted to have Louise come along and share some top tips and some really genuine supports for our families. So thank you very much for coming online, and I'll just take it away, Louise.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for coming and listening to me today and for sharing this information. So suicide prevention is everybody's business. What we mean by that is that anybody can be affected by suicidal thought, but also anybody could encounter someone who is affected by suicidal thought, and anyone can make a difference to someone who's affected by suicidal thought. Often people really worry about what can I do? Where do I signpost people to? Am I going to do the right thing? And that kind of thing. So we'll look at a wee bit of that today. So I was going to start by giving a kind of overview of what the facts are around suicide in Scotland at the moment, because sometimes people are a bit confused by the facts or don't quite know, and so we find it's easier to start with the kind of core numbers. What we do know is that nothing will kill more young people in Scotland this year than suicide. That is an absolute fact. It's roughly about 25% of deaths in people under 25 are due to suicide. So it is really important that we are talking about this in terms of our young people. At the moment, the suicide rate amongst young people is at its highest since 2007. What we do know is that it's approximately 265,000 people in Scotland that are thinking about suicide at any one time. So that's of all ages, and that might seem a really scary number, but actually it gives us hope, because what that proves is that just because you have thoughts of suicide does not mean you can go on to die. It's not guaranteed at all. Once upon a time, people used to really think that, you know, once somebody had gone down that route, there was no way back. And actually, this statistic proves that's not true. It's about 1 in 20, and mercifully 1 in 20 of us don't go on to die by suicide. So we take a lot of hope from that in our team, because what it shows is you can actually make a difference. You can have a conversation with people. You can find ways through those thoughts. What we also know is that approximately 10% of suicides in the northeast of Scotland, so Aberdeen City, Aberdeenshire and Moray, in the last year were amongst teenagers. So again, we're really grateful that you guys are kind of speaking to us. It is mercifully quite rare in young people, but nonetheless, it's still something that we want to look at, and it is still happening more often than we would like. So we're really glad that you guys have come to find out. Okie dokie. One of the questions we get asked most often is, how do I know? How do I know if my child is thinking about suicide? How do I know if, you know, are there warning signs I should look for? What are the things that might lead someone to be in that place? And so on. So that's why we've included this information today. One of the things we know is that it's about 30% of children and young people that will disclose thoughts of suicide. To give you a contrast, it's about 95% of adults who will. So one of the things when we're talking about young people is that we have to be a little bit better at kind of reading between those lines, a little bit better looking out at signs, looking for kind of things that seem unusual. What you will find is that often when we're talking about children and young people, they will talk more vaguely about their thoughts. So they might say things like, I can't do this, I'm feeling rubbish, I don't bring anything to the world, I'm hopeless, I'm just a burden, there's no good about me, those sorts of things. And it might be that those are just expressions of how they feel at that time, but it is worth just double checking what's behind that, what they mean by that. You may also see things like becoming a bit more withdrawn is something that we do see, or potentially the opposite, becoming more outgoing, someone who's been quite quiet and they've had that personality shift. And again, it might be that somebody has just found something that really works for them, but it is worth checking, particularly if you have someone where it's a sudden change or a kind of complete contrast to what would be normal for them. Like I say, in children and young people, because the kind of outward statements can be a bit more hidden, it is useful to know about some of the risk factors, some of the things that might lead young people to think about suicide, which are what are included in this kind of top right hand corner. So things like a physical disability or an illness that's present either in themselves or in the home. Losing a friend or family member to suicide is quite a big one. Actually, at all ages, there is a higher risk of suicide attempt if you've been bereaved by suicide. And actually, if that's a parental suicide attempt, that increases the risk of a child dying by 6 times. So if that's something that's kind of known to be in the mix, it is worth kind of double checking with someone. We'll talk a wee bit later on about the supports and things you can do. Exposure to bullying, or actually what we found is that this is equally true of those who are being bullied and those who do the bullying, is that there can be that higher risk of suicidal thoughts or behaviour. It is thought that that is because what leads someone to become a bully is something that could be making them unhappy, that there's other things lying behind that. But it is quite interesting because people often talk about suicidal risk in terms of someone who's being bullied, which is absolutely true, but there is that equal risk for someone who is a perpetrator of that bullying behaviour. Mental health conditions, that's one that's true for people of all ages, that you can have certain mental health conditions that have a higher risk of suicide with them. But it again can be a little bit of a red herring, that one, because it's roughly 1/3 of people who die by suicide who will have a mental health diagnosis, which means that it's 2/3 that don't. So although it is relevant in terms of young people, do not discount someone's thoughts or feelings or what they're saying just because they don't have that diagnosis, because it isn't a guaranteed thing. When we talk about access to harmful means, what we mean by that is someone who is stockpiling medication, or potentially it might be in the form of kind of displaying risky behaviour. You do see that in young people where they might kind of do things that are potentially endangering their life. And although they may not say, I am feeling suicidal, it's kind of showing a sense of where they're at in terms of how they place value on their life. And so that can be kind of seen as almost like a harmful mean. It could also be things like collecting things that can do harm to themselves, weapons and things, or somebody who kind of naturally lives in that environment, not so much in the city, but in other areas that we work in Grampian. You do find young people that are part of farming communities or fishing communities where there might be things like guns. So that would be something else that we would kind of include as a risk factor. This is very new research, so we don't have a whole story behind it yet, but there is research showing that children with ADHD have a heightened risk of suicide. And that we think is related partly to that higher level of impulsivity that comes with an ADHD condition, and partly also a lot of ADHD medications have a side effect of suicidal thought, or can do, within the first 100 days of taking that medication. So those two things seem to be playing into that picture. Still very young research, so we're still learning more about that, but it is just something to be aware of. And likewise, also witnessing or experiencing abuse could be something that has a relationship to suicidal thought and behaviour. We've made that note at the bottom about the ripple effect of suicide in a school. Could last for up to 2 years. It's just to make you aware in terms of what else is going on around and about somebody, that although it might not be something that would usually affect your loved one, your young one, your person, it is worth checking in if there's been a traumatic event around the school community because of just the way that young people's relationships work and how they relate to each other and so on and so forth. Okay. So this is all very well. You know, much as we can talk about all the red flags and things, actually, the only way you can know if somebody is thinking about suicide is to ask. It is the only reliable way to find out what's happening for someone. The only way we can support someone with thoughts of suicide is for them to talk of some description. You know, that's what starts the ball rolling, it starts the process. So the most helpful thing you can do is just to ask. And it can feel really scary. It can feel quite forward to kind of brutally ask the question. It feels not very British, is something that somebody once said to me. But actually, what we have found to be the most effective in this situation is just to be absolutely straight and honest and ask the question in the boldest way possible. And this is actually true for anyone over the age of 5. You might find, depending on what someone's understanding of the word suicide is, that you might have to explain a little bit around what you're asking, but the crux is the same regardless of the age of the young person you're speaking to from 5 upwards. If we were looking at somebody under the age of 5, mercifully, it's very, very rare that we would see kind of suicidal thought or behaviour in that age group. But if that is occurring, then that would be one where we'd be advising seeking medical and specialist help as soon as possible, because that's a very skilled thing to do. And so it's a very different way of kind of managing it. But for over the age of 5, we would be looking to ask that direct question. Are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about ending your life? And the reason we're so direct is twofold. One of which is you do not want to walk away from this conversation not quite being sure if anybody knew what each other was talking about and whether you've actually got the answer. That is not a nice place to be, believe me, having been there. And the other reason is actually we know that when people are in distress, their brain struggles to work. That actually the more distressed they become, the more difficult it is for their thoughts to kind of organise. We talk about cognitive function, but essentially the more difficult it is for them to kind of intake information. And so if someone is in that level of distress, we want to make it as easy as possible for them to communicate that and to understand what we're asking, which is the other reason why we're really clear and direct with this question. Something I can reassure you of is that there's been lots and lots and lots of research done. And what they've proven is you cannot create the thought of suicide. It will not make it worse to ask someone. It will not encourage somebody to think about suicide where they were not thinking about it already. Those are kind of really justifiable concerns that people often have about having this conversation, particularly with younger people. But what the research is showing is that that isn't the case. That suicidal thought, suicidal feeling is something that comes from inside. It's something someone will feel on the inside. So just talking to them or asking them about it is not going to kind of suddenly create that feeling. It's not going to suddenly take somebody down the route of kind of worrying about something they've not thought about before. So please be reassured about that. One of the things that is most effective to reduce suicide levels is to talk about it. It actually makes our community safer. What it does is it offers people an opportunity to share what's happening for them, to be able to get it out there. You know, I often actually refer to it a little bit like if you've got pressure cookers at home, if you've got Instapots or anything like that. What happens is you put the pressure cooker on, it's cooking away and cooking away and cooking away. And then you get to the point where you flick the tap, and if you're me, you run away to the other side of the kitchen, and the steam all comes flying out, and you let the pressure out. And actually, often people say that this kind of moment where somebody asks them about their thoughts of suicide is like that it allows the steam to get out. And in doing that, it makes your insides of your kind of Instapots all kind of settle down. So they're bubbling away, let the steam out and the inside settle down. And actually that allows someone that space to be able to kind of start to think a bit more clearly, to be able to start to think about what might be helpful, what might be needed. And actually it is very much like that. And often people will say to us, you know what, it was the right question. It was the question I was waiting for somebody to ask. And so that's actually helpful to a person. It's not harmful. Having said that, there are certain things that you might avoid saying. I would recommend staying away from anything that implies a kind of judgment or a dismissal of that person's feelings. So sometimes you hear people say, you're not going to do anything silly, are you? We do it for good reason. It's because it's a big, scary topic and people want to make it feel better. But what that feels like to the person you're asking is that you're basically saying that the way they feel, their deepest, darkest fears and emotions are silly or stupid. And the other reason is actually people genuinely think that suicide is the best option for them at this point. And so to them, it's not doing something silly. You know, it's doing something perfectly logical. And so for two reasons, that question isn't going to get you to where you need to be. And the other thing is, like I say, having people able to talk is really important. And so staying away from things that imply judgment or imply that you don't feel that their feelings are kind of worthwhile, or that you don't feel that the depth is there, is important, so that we can allow people to continue that conversation. We can allow people to talk about it. Another thing to kind of be wary of, and it's not that it's wrong to say it, it's just often people ask about, are you thinking about harming yourself? Which is fine, but, and there is actually a relationship between self-harm and suicidal thoughts. It's thought that roughly 25 to 50% of people who self-harm will also have thoughts of suicide, but the motivators for them are very different. So most people self-harm to cope, they self-harm to stay alive. Whereas obviously when we're talking about attempting suicide, that's towards death. So there's nothing wrong with asking about harm, but when we have talked to people who've survived suicide attempts or who live with suicidal thoughts, they actually say if you ask them if they were going to harm themselves, they would have said no, because they're not. They're going to kill themselves, and to them that's different. So there's nothing wrong with asking that question. It's just about kind of going on to follow that up with, are we actually, you know, when you say harming yourself, are you talking about suicide? Just again, so we're absolutely clear. And it may be that the person says no, and that there's nothing that they feel needs to be addressed at that point. But still, by being open and asking that open and honest question, it makes it more likely that that person would reach out for support if they needed to at any point in their life. It may be that someone says no and you're not quite sure about that, but you're not at a point where the person needs immediate intervention. And again, just by kind of saying, well, if you ever want to talk about that, you can speak to me, can set that precedent. What I've found when I've been working on the front line is often when you say to people, you know, you can actually speak to me, people come back. And actually, never, ever, ever underestimate that power of listening. Like I've said, when we talk about that kind of settling down with the steam being released, often that's all that's needed. That is very, very frequently where we save a life, is just allowing somebody to let it out. You know, it's just allowing somebody to kind of just get all those thoughts out, let somebody rant, say what they want, or say nothing. Sometimes you do have kind of people who want to sit in silence, and that's okay. Just by being silent and being there with them, you are meeting that need, you are hearing that need. And actually, this is true of any age that we've kind of researched with. They are all telling us, male or female, that there are two things and two things only that they need at that point when they're thinking about suicide. One of which is someone to listen to them, and another of which is someone to treat them with kindness. That's it. That's all they're looking for. And we can all do that just by being human beings, or, you know, even if it's a stranger, even if it's nobody, someone you've never ever met, you can still offer them that, what they need. Someone to listen to them, someone to treat them with kindness. And that's true of our young people as well. So that's the absolute key part of this, is being there, listening, letting someone just, you know, saying to someone, can you tell me what you want to tell me what's going on for you. And that doesn't mean that we have to fix it. It doesn't mean that we have to be responsible for everything. It doesn't mean that we're the only person who can do something. You know, it's just about that first step. Step one. I think we all know what it feels like to be in a place where you kind of think, you know, you're having a rant or whatever it is, and you encounter someone who wants to give you all the solutions or all the answers. My husband's an engineer, it's usually him, where he'll kind of say many ways where I could do that better next time. And actually I get a bit ratty because that's not what I want. I just want to rant. And actually, this is what a person needs in this time. So give yourself permission not to have to fix it, not to have to come up with the solutions, because that's not what someone's looking for you in that moment. You know, so actually just let them let it out. You're responding to the person and where they're at. It is very likely when somebody gets to the point of thinking about suicide that what's going on for them is so huge that actually we can't fix it in one fell swoop anyway. And actually, just as a side note, one of the things that sometimes people ask about is why sometimes young people can have a reaction that seems a really deep reaction to something that maybe seems trivial to you. And the reason for that actually is because this may be the first time ever in their life that they have felt this depth of feeling. And if you encounter something for the very first time, you have no life experience to draw on that this will change, that something will feel better, and so for you, this depth of feeling feels endless. It feels like you're kind of stuck in there forever. And with young people, that often is the first time they're experiencing these emotions or that depth of emotion. And that's how certain scenarios that we might look back on as adults and think, okay, why are they kind of getting in a tangle about that? Or something that seems trivial to us, or we kind of say, well, you know, I know your hires aren't looking great, but by the time you've been through uni, no one will care. That sort of thing isn't computing, because for the person, that's the first time. They have nothing, unlike us as adults that have kind of grown further than that, where we can draw on previous life experiences and say, okay, well, yeah, I experienced this before and then I came through it. They do not have that. And that's why young people experience such a depth of emotion. And it's also tied in with the way that their brains are kind of remodeling, we call it, at that age. And so it's a bit of a combination that can result in quite a strong reaction to something that we might think is quite trivial. So do your absolute best to try and understand why that person's reacting to that, even if it seems trivial to you. The fact is that their depth of feeling is real. So that's your first step, the bit about kind of listening, just letting someone get it out. Your second step is about, okay, well, what do we need to do next? What will help and who will help? And actually, in terms of you and the young person, the expert in the room in them is them. So it's far more likely that they will know what will help than you will. You know, so again, give yourself permission not to have to absolutely know everything, absolutely all the time. You know, we are going to give you some information on supports that are available and things you can connect people to. But actually, it is extremely likely that the person who's in this crisis will actually know either what could make that difference, or where the pressure is, or what's kind of led to them being where they are. And often you can pick up on those little clues as you're kind of speaking to someone. So someone might say, admittedly, I don't tend to see this so much in kind of young people, but it might say, well, I know I'm in tons of debt and I know that there's deadlines, but I can't phone them. And that's your little inkling to kind of go, okay, we've talked a wee bit about what might help here. So, you know, what can we do? What might kind of be access? And the third bit, and this is absolutely golden, is the bit about connecting someone with that support. We are unbelievably good in this life at giving people phone numbers and websites and emails. We are not very good at asking them if they're going to be able to phone them. And actually, in this instance, that is golden. That's the other place where we most commonly save a life, is actually just saying, shall we stick the phone on speaker and phone together? Shall we, you know, shall we just do a bit of a Google together and just see what's out there? Or, you know, I've heard there's an app that you can have a look at. Should we just have a nosy through and see what you think? These things are magic, because often people can't quite make that connection for themselves when they're in this place. And so just having someone to take that wee step alongside them can be absolutely pivotal to somebody accessing that support. And obviously, if they access that support, they're much more likely to benefit from it than if they don't. So it's one of those things that sometimes gets forgotten, but don't be afraid to walk alongside someone just a little bit. Doesn't mean that you're responsible for them forever. It doesn't mean you're doing it all for them, but it's just that moment of like, let's just try a wee bit here. And there is a wee bit of a caveat that we put on there about young people can be impulsive and you can have quite a quick acceleration. So if you're unsure in any way, shape or form, always err on the side of caution when we're looking at young people. And that includes actually access to 999 if required. You know, we would always say, so if there is a threat to life, which in terms of suicide prevention, we mean somebody who's somewhere that's perilous, so if they're standing somewhere that could become quite risky, or if they're saying they just cannot stop themselves, or if you're on a phone and you cannot see and they're saying I've got knives, meds, whatever, again, that would be a 999, just because we cannot afford to take that risk of whether that person can keep themselves safe or not. And when we're talking about children and young people, we would say are on the side of caution in terms of reaching out for further support, just to be sure that we've got what we need there. And equally, it is worth kind of tapping into some of these supports as well for kind of ongoing support with a young person, but that will be taken care of as part of that process when you're reaching out for the help. They will walk you through some of this. So these are just a small selection of the things that can help to keep well, I say our young people, actually, most of them are available to all humans in our society. So you guys as parents and carers and loved ones are humans too. That's a very big caveat that we put out there. It can be an incredibly difficult thing to be concerned about someone who's suicidal, to live with that as a loved one. So please remember these supports for yourself as humans in society as well. They are absolutely there for you. So what we have there's breathing space, so they can work with anyone over the age of 16. Samaritans can work with anyone of any age, which sometimes people don't realise. They will talk to children as well. And that's a free phone number, and it also doesn't appear on a bill. So if you've got any kind of young people that are worried about what if somebody finds out, etc., etc., the Samaritans number will not appear on their phone bill. And they have email as well, joe@samaritans.org. So again, sometimes we find with young people, they find it easier to type or to text, or, you know, and in which case go with that. You know, that's absolutely fine. There are options for them. Samaritans has one. There's an agency called Shout, which provides text crisis support, again, for anyone of any age, and it's 24/7, so it's well worth having a look at. If you've got someone who's going, I can't phone, that's not happening, you know, you can say, that's right, you don't have to. Likewise, our GP practice teams are there to help us, or NHS 24. NHS 24 has a mental health team available 24/7 now. So on 111, your usual NHS 24 number, so that's can be quite a useful kind of one-stop shop if you're really not quite sure what to do or what stage you're at or what's happening. They can be really useful because they are all psychological practitioners that would be answering that mental health team line, so they can kind of give useful help as well. Remember the other adults and people in someone's life. When we're talking about people who might be thinking about suicide, not all of them will be at full crisis all the time. So actually, some of these other adults or other role models that are in a young person's life can be very helpful in terms of helping to keep them going, in terms of checking in with them as to how they are, even if they are not aware. You know, just someone knowing that, you know, saying to someone, well, you always have a real boost after you've been to guides on a Thursday. You know, that is something to help keep them alive. That is something to help them kind of keep moving through their week. So although it's not an obvious kind of direct input, it is something to kind of help to keep them going. On our SAMH website, we've got several publications around suicide, around living with your own thoughts, around how to support someone else. We have one around after a suicide that we hope is an enormous waste of time, but we do know some people need, so that's there. Papyrus and Young Minds have loads of really good resources around young people's mental health in general, and also in terms of suicide prevention, and that's what Papyrus specialise in. When we're talking about Papyrus, when they say young people, they mean people under the age of 35, which I don't quite qualify for anymore, but more people do than you maybe realise. And they have a crisis line as well. It's called a hope line. So their information is worth having a nosy at. Obviously, we've talked about 999 if there's an immediate risk to life. You've got all your in-school supports, which the school can advise you on what they have available. It varies from school to school, so it's worth checking. If you're concerned at all, have a chat to your school, see what they can offer. Childline is one that people sometimes forget. They think a lot about kind of maybe in terms of reporting abuse and things, but actually they can also support young people who are in crisis or who are struggling with distress. It's missing 2 ones, I think. It should be 0800 111 but never mind. They are able to support anyone under the age of 19. And we've also got our apps. So the Prevent Suicide app is available for free on Android, on iOS, on Windows, on anything you can think of. And it's also available as a website. So if you don't have a smartphone, or if you'd rather print off the information, or you want to email it or whatever, it's available that way. And on there is a heap of stuff. There's some myths and facts around suicide, which actually parents and carers and things have told us have been really helpful to guide that conversation with a young person. I had a really lovely example of someone who said, actually, what we did was we opened the page and this young person struggled to verbalise. And so what he did was he kind of indicated with these myths and facts what was happening for him by kind of saying, well, actually, this bit here is what's happening for me, because he wasn't quite able to give that to his parents straight. So it's been useful in kind of other ways that we hadn't imagined. There's also information on how to help someone. So if you completely forget everything you've heard today, it's actually laid out step by step in terms of how you have that conversation. What do you do? Who do you reach out for help? There's a big directory of services, including a page specifically for children and young people's resources. And if you have your phone enabled in that way, you can actually just click through on the numbers and it'll phone straight off of the app. And there's also information in there on how to create a safe plan, which is one of the most effective ways of helping someone manage suicidal thoughts. It can also be used for things like self-harm as well, or for addiction as well. You see safe plans used too. So what is in there is things like who's in my corner, what are the warning signs I need to worry about, what can I do, who do I contact, who are the people I want to contact, who are the people I don't, you know, that's equally as important. And it's a really lovely way of helping anyone in this situation, but particularly we find with children and young people, for them to feel they have that empowerment, for them to feel they have that control over what's happening for them. And, you know, that actually that is really vital for helping with your recovery, helping you to work your way through it. So on the app, that is set up as if you have never ever seen it before, as if you've never had a work or anything. So it's designed so that you can work through it on your own or with a loved one without needing any specialist knowledge. And it's definitely something when parents ask about what can I do to support my young person, that is massive. If you can have a wee look at that kind of safe plan and look at maybe putting some of those steps in place, because feelings of suicide are very rarely actually about wanting to be dead. They're much more commonly about wanting it to stop, wanting to take back control, wanting to feel, you know, you feel like you can't control anything and you just want that to stop. And actually the opposite of that is feeling empowered and feeling like you have options and how you have things that you can draw on. And a safe plan is a really good way to start to think about that, about what you actually have in your control, about what you have in your corner. And it's also a really good way to work with your young person. If you've got someone who kind of on an ongoing basis talks about suicidal thought, or they kind of go through peaks and troughs, that's very normal. But what it does is it gives you a bit of a framework to kind of say, okay, have we tried this? Have we tried this? If nothing on your safe plan is working, that's another time where I'd be suggesting 999, or at least at the very least NHS 24, because that's an indication that the thoughts are of a point where they need that emergency intervention. So it helps you to gauge, and equally it helps to have a conversation and say, okay, when we did this last time, we talked through Safe Plan. Do you think you're roughly where you were last time? Do you think that maybe it's worse? Do you think it's better? And so on and so forth. And so that kind of constant conversation helps, because I think one of the things that can be really difficult when you've got kind of repeated conversations in this way is that sense of, okay, is it urgent now or is it not? Is it urgent now or is it not? And so it can be really helpful to talk through, okay, have we tried the things on the Safe Plan? Right, let's go back and try something else. Let's try a different option that you haven't got, you've not tried yet today, and we'll see. And if that's not working, okay, then we can, you know, have a chat about what comes next. And then some of these more specialist resources might be what's needed. So it's a really good thing to have. And it's a good thing to have as a human being anyway, I think, you know, that sense of what keeps you well, what doesn't, what might be a trigger for you, and how you can look after that. So this is us. We are the North East Suicide Prevention Team. There are 4 of us in the team, and I am Louise Penfold, as Donna said. So these are all our contact details. You're more than welcome to get in touch if you have any questions, or if you're looking for resources for anything. The best email addresses to use is our North East Suicide Prevention at samh.org.uk email address, because we all check that, so it means that you're more likely to get a response, because we are a part-time team. Each one of us works part-time, but that's where you can go to if you're interested in further training, if you're interested in any of our resources, if you'd like hard copies of any of our resources, we can sort that kind of thing out for you as well. And that's me, Donna.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. I can't believe how much ground you've actually covered in that 45 minutes. So really appreciate it. I think for me, the takeaway is just the power of listening and just being there for someone, just to listen to their story. And that's one of my takeaways. And the other thing that you did mention was just that golden magic moment where, yes, we are guilty of signposting, but if we can do that together with someone, that Googling together, and I hadn't really thought about that. And it's lovely to know that there is apps for safe plans, and I think our parents will definitely be interested in that. Unfortunately, we've had some technical issues tonight, and a lot of parents have been in contact to say that they couldn't access. So I'm glad that we're recording it, and so there isn't any questions because we've got a few attendees, but I'm sure that we'll be able to, I'm going to pass on your slides immediately to folks, but I just want to thank you very much for coming along and sharing with us this evening.
You're more than welcome, Donna. Thank you.